Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Decoding the Unknown. Today, a big one, presidential conspiracy theories. We're not even doing something specific. What are we talking about today? Presidential assassination insurance. That can't be a thing. John Quincy Adams was a pimp. No, he wasn't. He was a literal pimp. John Quincy Adams. As in, the president. Must be the What is happening, Kevin? All right, Kevin wrote it, by the way. I read it. My name's Simon. Welcome to the show. Hope you enjoy it. If you do, make sure you subscribe. If you're listening to it as a podcast, make sure you leave a review. I mean, I'd do it after you listen to it, because otherwise you don't know if you'll like it or not, will you? Unless you're like, wow, this British man, I already love him. He doesn't seem like a dick at all. Well, let's find out, shall we? There's a growing belief among journalists, academics, and average people that that conspiracy theories are more common and widespread than in any other point in time in history, thanks to the speed at which the internet can disseminate information or misinformation. Dude, especially with like Midjourney and those AI image generators, which are getting wildly good. And you're like, I don't know if this is real anymore. I made one the other day. It was like some video thing. And I was like, Tom Cruise punching a giant pink bear. And it even did Tom Cruise with his like Tom Cruise face, and he punched him in a way that Tom Cruise would punch him, so sort of like multiple rapid jabs like this. It was the most Tom Cruise thing ever, and it looks like him, and there was a pink bear, and they're just in a big warehouse for some reason, and I'm just like, this is crazy. Just before we continue today, quick word from our fantastic sponsor, and that is Surfshark. Look, if your internet traffic isn't encrypted, it's not private, it's out there, it's visible. Your ISP, people tracking you to whoever's on that airport Wi-Fi with you. It's all very weird, it's all very public, and it's not very nice. But Surfshark, they lock down that. They encrypt your connection so your data stays private. It works across unlimited devices. I've got it, on my phone, on my laptop, on my desktop, just about on my tablet, on my smart fridge. No, not really. Don't have a smart fridge, just got a regular ass fridge like a regular person. But it would if I had one. Let's get back to the points. It also blocks ads, it blocks trackers, and it lets you spoof your location for content access and privacy. And now there's an extra deal. You can use the code DTU and you'll get an extra 4 months on the plan. So whether you're working remotely, streaming internationally, or just tired of being digitally followed everywhere you go, this is one of the easiest upgrades that you can make. Just go to surfshark.com/DTU or use the code DTU at checkout to get 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN. And now back to today's episode. Besides, how could people have believed in tinfoil hat conspiracies before tinfoil was even invented? However, while there is certainly a public perception that conspiracies are more prevalent than ever, there isn't really any evidence to back this up. A 2022, that sounds like a conspiracy theory right there, Kevin. A 2022 research paper looked into the topic and found that there was no notable increase in the number of conspiracies or the percentage of people believing in them, though it's possible that the conspiracies have become more visible because of the internet. Yeah, that's what I think. I think we're just more aware of them now. Like, I am aware of way more conspiracy theories than I ever was. Do I subscribe to any of them? Absolutely not. Not until they become actual theories and then some sort of proof emerges and then you're like, oh look, the conspiracy people were right. 1 in a million times. That didn't mean people believed or interacted with the conspiracies, just that they'd seen them and were at least vaguely aware of them. Kevin and I, we have been on the same page so much lately. I mean, sometimes we'll have disagreements and Kevin will be like, he'll say something, I'll be like, Kevin. But mostly, lately, lots on the same page. I like it. That said, the researchers admitted the limitations of their own study, as they had to rely on public surveys for the majority of their data. And since this topic didn't become the subject of serious research until relatively recently, that data is often hard to find. But even if they're more visible now, conspiracy theories have existed since time immemorial. In fact, they were arguably more popular back when information traveled much slower, as the average person's baseline knowledge wasn't that high, and it took a lot longer for conspiracy theories to be disproven, assuming they weren't actually true. Admittedly, most of the presidential conspiracy theories that we'll be talking about today are from the last century or so, but that's just because they're better documented and about things that our viewers are more likely to care about. Also, it's worth mentioning that conspiracies are a real thing that do exist sometimes. Most of the theories we'll be discussing today are clearly nonsensical bullshit. Oh, okay, I see. The John Quincy Adams thing being a literal pimp is the conspiracy theory. That makes sense. I'm not sure why I didn't get that immediately. It's because I'm slow. You got a tiny, tiny, smooth brain. But at least one of these theories was actually proven to be true. Please tell me it's the pimp one. But before we get into conspiracy theories related to specific presidents, I want to address a theory that's been applied to nearly every president over the past 100 years. Presidential assassination insurance. Wouldn't this be just like normal life insurance? And also, what's the insurance going to cover if the president dies? Like, the funeral? I'm pretty sure that's covered by, like, the government, no? And who's that insurance policy for? The government? This is very confusing. Let's find out. The Founding Fathers meant well, but they made some really, really big mistakes. Among them was that the Constitution stipulated that the president would be elected. And I'm not just talking about the Electoral College and the resulting 3/5 compromise, though the number of people who've won the presidency despite losing the popular vote by millions is certainly concerning. I do find it strange. Look, the UK's up in its own special way with, like, first past the post, but it is weird that the person who's in charge of the country doesn't necessarily win the popular vote. Like, most people are like, no. And it's just like, there's just some states which are more powerful than others or something like that. But the bigger problem was that there was a single ballot for president, and whoever came in second place would become the vice president. That was a bad idea. Obviously something that's been done away with now. But it's like, that is the person who you are fighting with to lead the country. And then they come second, and now they're your... Or they come second, and now the person they're fighting against is their boss. You know, if you're the vice president, you come second, and then you're like, oh no, I'm working for the guy that I was just talking about for like months. And look, if you're optimistic and an idealist, I can totally see why this would have seemed like a reasonable solution. However, it didn't take America long to realize their epic blunder. John Adams won the 1796 presidential election as the candidate for the Federalist Party. Ideally, another Federalist would have been vice president, but the electors split their votes among possible contenders. As a result, Thomas Jefferson of the Democratic Republican Party, that used to be a thing apparently, got the second most votes for president, thus becoming vice president. Wait, wasn't Thomas Jefferson at some point president? Wasn't he? Or was he just one of the founding fathers? I don't know. I got confused about this the other day and people made fun of me. I can't remember who it was. It was like one of the early people. It was like Ben Franklin. Was Ben Franklin president? I literally don't... I think so. Or was he just one of the founding fathers? It's... Every American's like, how do you possibly not know this? And I'll just write, it's not my country! While the drafters of the Constitution likely believed that the two men would put their differences aside and work together to do what was best for the American people. Oh, please. Oh, my sweet summer child. They absolutely did not. It became immediately clear that having a president and vice president who refused to work together was a disaster, and that such a situation needed to be avoided in the future. So the Constitution only was able to survive a single presidency before people realized that they fucked up, and the only reason it lasted that long was because George Washington was unanimously elected both times and was absolutely opposed to partisan politics. Anyway, to fix this for the presidential election of 1800, the parties decided to put forward a ticket of presidential and vice presidential candidates. That's what happens today, right? You got the ticket. With the president and the vice president, they're both getting elected together. Problem solved, right? Well, the way Kevin writes that, I get the feeling he's being sarcastic, but isn't that the same system that exists today? Well, not so much. Even though the parties had done this, it wasn't codified into law. Electors still each cast 2 votes for president, and the votes were not distinguished in any way, but the parties had a workaround for this. They would all vote for whoever they wanted to be president, and every elector, except for one, would vote for who they wanted to be vice president. I'm a little bit lost, but okay, America. The Democratic Republican Party ran Thomas Jefferson as their presidential candidate and Aaron Burr as the vice presidential candidate, but it was expected to be a close race. It was such a close race that all the electors were afraid of being the person to abstain from voting for Burr, as they feared multiple people might do so, and they would wind up with a Federalist vice president. It didn't help that information traveled so slowly back then that everybody assumed an elector in a different state must have had the responsibility of being the abstaining vote. If you're trying to organize something like this, you really have to organize it. You can't just hope for the best. It's not going to work. And we see that here. How do you not foresee this? Since not a single person broke rank, the result was a tie. You got some game theory going on here. Jefferson and Burr received the same number of votes for president, so the tie had to be broken by Congress. But on the plus side, this clusterfuck resulted in Congress and the states pretty much speed-running the ratification of the 12th Amendment, which had electors vote for president and vice president separately. That solved the problem of having parties split the presidency and vice presidency, but it created a new problem. The vice president wasn't really important anymore. Thanks to the creation of the presidential tickets, people were really only voting for the president, with the VP being more of an afterthought. This was reflected not only in public perception, but by the diminishing role the VP played in governance. Running mates were increasingly chosen to balance out factors like the relative age of candidates, or candidates from small states picking up a VP from a big state, because the candidates pretty much always win their home state, so it was free electoral college votes. Yeah, it's pretty smart. I mean, in the modern day, right, vice president just goes and cuts ribbons, right? And is basically there just in case the main president just kicks the bucket or gets assassinated or whatever, right? In fact, the VP became such a seemingly meaningless job that Woodrow Wilson's vice president, Thomas Marshall, famously said, "Once there were two brothers. One ran away to sea, the other was elected vice president, and nothing was ever heard from either of them again." That's a nice quote, Woodrow Wilson. For some reason, there's a big statue of Woodrow Wilson in the Prague train station. I really feel like I should know the reason for that. And there's a big quote on the wall. I'm pretty sure it's got something to do with the war. And with the vice presidency becoming such a meaningless position, this created an opportunity. Why choose a running mate that you trusted to follow through with your agenda when you could instead choose someone so incompetent, unqualified, or in the case of Dick Cheney, so purely evil, allegedly, that nobody in their right mind would dare assassinate you for fear who would take over instead? Oh, that's clever. I never even thought about that. That's really, really clever. Is that what Trump was going for with Mike Pence? Because he was extremely Christian, right? And he believed in was it Mike Pence? Am I thinking of Mike Pence, who believed the world was literally 9,000 years old or something? He was a creationist? I'm sorry, Mike Pence, if that's not you. Or was it that other woman? Who was the woman from Alaska? Who was she running with? Was she she was a Republican. Was it Sarah Palin? Oh, I don't know. That's really clever strategy, though. While it may have started even earlier than I can find, the earliest definitive evidence of this conspiracy theory I can find ironically surrounds JFK, who people argue would have been assassinated much sooner were it not for the fact that Lyndon Johnson would become president. Oh, I see. I thought it was a literal insurance policy, like a money thing, but it's an insurance policy. You have someone shit just so no one wants to kill you. It's really clever. This is a really clever idea. The same has been said about Bush Sr. running with Dan Quayle, Bush Jr. running with Dick Cheney, and Bill Clinton running with a lifeless mannequin. Wait, who the fuck? Was it Al Gore? Was Al Gore Bill Clinton's vice president? Oh my god, I don't know that. I was a kid when Bill Clinton was in office. Although this idea is typically considered a conspiracy theory, it's not necessarily wrong. Richard Nixon is quoted as explicitly referring to Spiro Agnew as his assassination insurance, going on to say, "No assassin in his right mind would kill me. They know that if they did, they would end up with Agnew." I don't know anything about Spiro Agnew, other than he's got quite a cool name, Spiro. Admittedly, while this does highlight public distrust of elected officials and manipulative... Just imagine... Who's running for president? Yes, it's Barack Obama. And his vice president, Osama bin Laden. Because he was still alive. I was going to say it with Trump and stuff, but obviously Osama bin Laden's dead. Who's the new bad guy? And his vice president, Kim Jong-un. Woo! Woo! Admittedly, while this does highlight public distrust of elected officials and manipulative tactics they might be employing, I recognize that this isn't what most people think of when they think of conspiracies. Well, don't worry, this is still Decoding the Unknown, so there will be plenty of conspiracy theories about aliens in this episode, but for now, let's move on to something much more salacious. It's John Adams, who was literally a pimp. Ever since it was the parenthetical title of a 1987 single off Ice-T's album Rhyme Pays, the phrase, "pimpin' ain't easy," has been uttered untold millions of times. While it's true that any sort of illicit enterprise brings with it certain risks and pitfalls, pimping is probably a hell of a lot easier when you're protected by diplomatic immunity. Diplomatic immunity. And that is precisely what the 6th President of the United States, John Quincy Adams, was accused of. I have one experience of diplomatic immunity. I won't go into too many details, but I was somewhere and I was friends with a diplomat, and he would regularly just drive his car drunk. And he'd just drive it around. And anytime the police stopped him, he'd just point at his license plate and they'd just wave him on. And you're just like, this is crazy. I'm not going to say what country it was or anything like that. It wasn't a Western country, put it that way. I think they take it a little bit more like, don't do that shit. And that is precisely what the 6th President of the United States, John Quincy Adams, was accused of. The presidential election of 1824 was a bit of a shit show. There were 4 major candidates, but nobody won the majority. Andrew Jackson came closest with 41% of the popular vote and 99 out of 261 electoral votes, but a president's required to win a majority to become elected. A plurality won't cut it. According to the 12th Amendment that we discussed a little bit earlier, in the event that no presidential candidate won a majority, the president would be voted on by the House of Representatives. This had the possibility to result in one of the most epically corrupt moments in American history, as Speaker of the House Henry Clay had been one of the presidential candidates. Unfortunately for Clay came fourth in the running, and the House was only allowed to vote among the top 3 candidates. However, although Jackson had won a plurality of the vote and expected to be elected by Congress, Clay used his considerable influence as Speaker of the House to instead get John Quincy Adams elected. Alright, how does that help him though? This led to the conspiracy theory among Jackson and his voters that Adams and Clay had engaged in a corrupt bargain, a secret backroom deal to make Adams the president instead of Jackson. Though never proven, this conspiracy gained a lot of traction following Adams' inauguration when he made Clay his Secretary of State. Oh, I had a deal. I feel like that's just they had a drink together and they arranged this. Like, why else would he do this? The choice was obvious. It should have been what's his face? The other guy, Jackson. Things only escalated from there, and the 1828 election was one of the most scandalous in American history. There was mud being slung from both sides at incredible rates, much of it conspiratorial in nature. This was such a bizarre thing. I'm just thinking about this now. Like, can you imagine? No, Donald Trump ran the election because Hillary Clinton was also running. She's now Donald Trump's vice president. Be like, that ain't gonna work. Be like, Crooked Hillary! Get in here, I need you! I'm not going to try and do Trump. People do Trump. I get the feeling it might be quite easy to learn, but I'm not going to try. Adams accused Jackson of immoral conduct and accused his wife Rachel of adultery. Holy shit. Accusations that were technically true. Oh, okay. It's still a little bit below the belt, guys. I feel like even today, going after someone's, spouse would be a bit ugh. Don't do that. When Jackson and Rachel got married, they were under the assumption that Rachel's first husband had filed for divorce. He hadn't, so the first few years of their marriage were technically in violation of bigamy laws. Well, alright, chill. This was a really sensitive topic for Jackson. He had killed a man in a duel for talking about it, and his hot-headed nature and irrational responses to objective fact made it a favourite topic among his political rivals as a way to piss Jackson off. I did know this. It's kind of wild that Andrew Jackson killed a man. That wasn't a good idea, though, because rather than fighting back using facts about Adams, Jackson instead spread a bunch of wild conspiracies about him instead. Not only were there allegations of a corrupt backroom deal with Clay, which very much might have been true. Yeah, that seems like... what is the other explanation there? But Jackson and his supporters accused Adams of using taxpayer money to install poker tables in the White House so that he could engage in illegal gambling. They also accused him of outright theft of taxpayer money, claiming he was overstating his expenses and pocketing the difference. I feel like, obviously this happens, and I'm just thinking, if you're the president, you think isn't there an accountability office? People are going to be looking into that. But the most scandalous conspiracy surrounding Adams was that when he was stationed in Russia as the United States ambassador back in the early 1800s, he had been working as a pimp for Tsar Alexander I. Specifically, Adams had hired a young American maid for his wife, and he was accused of renting the woman out to the Tsar for other activities. This is ridiculous. Even though there was no evidence to support these claims, it was enough to swing the 1828 election in Jackson's favor. The United States simply wasn't ready to have a pimp for their president. Except he wasn't. He just made that up. Just straight fabrication. What do they say? A lie gets halfway around the world while the truth is put its shoes on. Teddy Roosevelt orchestrated the Panamanian Revolution. Again, I don't know if it's Teddy Roosevelt, but the Americans have had some pretty substantial adventures in South America. Central America? Panama? South America. Oh, there's two. There's Panama and Paraguay. Which is the one that's northern? Which is the one that's south? Paraguay is the one that's landlocked in the south, right? I hope so. In the late 1800s, President William McKinley was looking for the best place to build a canal to cut across Central America. There were talks of building a canal in Nicaragua, which is how we pronounce it in the UK. I know people are like, you mean Nicaragua or whatever. And I'm like, no, that's not what I mean. But when the search was expanded, it was determined that Panama was the best possible location for such a canal. And despite McKinley ordering 2 separate commissions to find a location for a canal, the answer they decided on was nothing new. People had theorized about the possibility of building a canal through the Colombian-owned Department of Panama for centuries, though the area, well, there we go. It's the northern one, because I know Colombia's in the north. But it's South America still, right? It's not Central America. Central America's like Mexico and Guatemala, right? Does anyone else count as Central America? I don't know. Doesn't matter. Let's carry on. Though the area had different names over the years, and at the time the French were currently in the process of trying to construct a canal. Oh yes, and department is basically just the Colombian word for its states, in case there was any confusion. Anyway, the French gave it a good effort for over a decade, but they eventually gave up and were just keeping enough workers there to fulfill their contractual obligations. The French no longer had any interest in building a canal, but they wanted to sell the contract for the land and all their equipment for $109 million. Over $4 billion in today's money, goddamn. I mean, I guess it's a lot of land, right? You're building a canal all the way across a country. All the way across a continent, shit. After McKinley was assassinated, Teddy Roosevelt took over. And really, having Teddy Roosevelt as your vice president is the opposite of assassination insurance. That was pretty much just begging someone to murder him. Anyway, Roosevelt looked through all of the information regarding possible routes through Central America, and he agreed that Panama was the way to go. I like that this is so hands-on. You're the president. He's not asking like a geography dude. He's like, nah, that looks good. I'm president. Make it happen. Teddy Roosevelt was just straight gangster. And he agreed that Panama was the way to go, but $109 million was entirely too much to pay for it. Fortunately, there wasn't an official offer made by Compagnie Nouvelle, the company in charge of the project. Details of the report Roosevelt received were leaked to the company's general manager, Philippe Bernard Varia. Philippe had essentially been stranded in Panama for years and wanted to get out, so he spoke with the shareholders and got them to agree to a formal offer of $40 million instead of the $109 million they'd been looking for. Philippe just wants to go home. He's like, it's hot, this has failed, I've been stuck here for years. I want to go back to France, I want to drink the wine, come on, let me go home. That's the worst French accent I've ever done, I apologize. That was a really good deal, but the United States was able to negotiate an even better one. Instead of $40 million all at once, they would pay $10 million up front and lease the land from Colombia in perpetuity for $250,000 per year. As long as they kept paying, they would control the land. And after 100 years, that still would have been over only $35 million in total. Yeah. And also, I don't know if they're counting inflation on that, because, like, I guess $250,000 a year, like back in the day, is quite a lot. I don't know how long that would keep Air Force One in the air for, but probably about 15 minutes, I would guess. It was a really good deal, and the United States Congress was quick to ratify the treaty. However, the Colombian Senate refused to ratify it. The idea of the United States taking control of the land currently being leased by the French was wildly unpopular in Colombia, and they also felt like they were being severely underpaid compared to the value of the lands. I mean, yeah, because they were. To be fair, they absolutely were. Yes, Kevin and I, same page. This left Teddy in a bind. He wanted the Panama Canal, but Colombia didn't want to give it to him. What was a man to do? Well, according to conspiracy theorists, Teddy and the United States made a bunch of secret deals with the Panamanian separatists to incite them to revolt with a promise of aid from the US military. And as official documents would later reveal, the conspiracy theorists were 100% correct about this. I have a conspiracy theory, which I don't want to talk about because it sounds bad, but there's a war going on at the moment, and I've got a conspiracy theory about that war. And I don't know if it'll ever come out, or if anyone else thinks this. I've not read about it yet. Okay, enough. I'm not going to talk about it. Teddy Roosevelt absolutely incited the Panamanian Revolution because he was pissed off that Colombia wouldn't ratify their treaty, and he sent the US Navy to blockade Panama's shores, preventing Colombia from sending reinforcements to fight off the rebellion. The result was a relatively quick battle for independence with minimal bloodshed, and Panama obviously emerging victorious. And now that Panama was its own nation, their new ambassador to the US, Philippe Bernard Varia. Oh, wait, you didn't get to go home to France? Oh no, Philippe! That's the same dude, right? It is the same dude. And he was happy to negotiate a deal for the Panama Canal. In fact, he negotiated the exact same deal that they'd previously agreed to. $10 million up front and $250,000 per year in perpetuity for as long as the US wanted to continue leasing the land from Panama. Philippe was in such a hurry to get this deal done and get the fuck out of Panama. He's like, come just please. I want to go home. Why do we have telephones? That in a single night he drafted the nation's constitution, designed their flag, created a structure for their military, and even offered to loan them money from his own personal account to help get them started. Panama didn't take all of his ideas, but it was clear that Philippe was willing to do anything to make the sale go through so that he could fucking leave. I've never been to Panama, but you're not really selling it to me, Philippe. Events like these serve as a nice reminder that while a lot of conspiracies sound ridiculous, the US government absolutely will incite revolutions and create entirely new nation states just to further their own interests. I mean, I am not a conspiracy theorist, but I have to say here, to the surprise of absolutely nobody who has any knowledge of America, the United States' involvement in South America. Like, come on. CIA adventures for decades. Warren Harding was murdered by his wife for cheating. The death of a president in office is always the cause of a lot of speculation and discussion. Or so I'm told anyway. The last president to die of natural causes was 80 years ago. Still, was that Roosevelt too? Still, a seemingly healthy and well-liked president suddenly dying while in office is the stuff of wet dreams for conspiracy-minded individuals, and President Warren Harding's death did not disappoint. It was the summer of 1923. Well, that was 100 years ago. Oh, it must be Roosevelt too. Roosevelt's return. Different Roosevelt. Also pretty cool. I liked FDR. FDR had some good going on. It was the summer of 1923 and Harding was on a 15,000-mile speaking tour spanning the entire United States. He'd even traveled to Alaska to speak, making him the first US president to ever visit the state. Things were going great, and there were big plans to exploit this trip as part of his re-election campaign the following year. But on July the 27th, shortly after giving a speech at the University of Washington, Harding fell ill. He went to bed early and called for one of his personal doctors, Charles Sawyer. Sawyer was a homeopathic doctor. Uh-oh, it's not a doctor. You're not a doctor! Who had served as Harding's... I don't want to say doctor. Who had served as Harding's homeopath. There we go. For years before he became president. Harding brought Charles with him to the White House, though he was also given the much better Dr. Joel Boone to treat him as well. Who, I don't know, I'm assuming Dr. Joel there, actual doctor. Harding was complaining of upper abdominal pain that night, but Sawyer believed it was nothing serious, just some gastrointestinal issues. How about we ask Dr. Joel? Okay, how about we ask him what he thinks? This was nothing new, as Harding had suffered from GI issues for some time, as well as dealing with a now defunct diagnosis of neurasthenia, a nerve condition which modern researchers believe may have been dysautonomia. I have to say, gastrointestinal stuff. I got friends who suffer from this and, get discomfort and all of this. And I'm like, I don't know, I can eat the spiciest food in the world, and I'll just be like, yeah, it's good. It's good. I can't eat spicy food. That's hot because I sweat like an absolute monster. But, I've got a gut of steel, apparently. For those with dysautonomia, that's when your body just kind of forgets to do all the things it's supposed to do subconsciously, like regulate body temperature, heart rate, and whatnot. It reminds me of that joke. It's kind of harsh. I don't know why it was David Beckham, but it was so David Beckham goes to the barber, and he's wearing headphones. And the barber says, well, David, I need you to take the headphones off. And David's like, I can't take the headphones off, mate. Sorry, I gotta keep them on. And the barber's like, okay. So the barber's going around, he's doing his hair, he starts washing David's hair, and he's washing around these headphones, and David Beckham falls asleep. He's just starts drifting off while he's having his hair washed. You got your head back in that sink, something I haven't done in over a decade. And the barber's like, all right, well, I'm just gonna take these headphones off. He takes them off, and he continues washing David Beckham's hair. And he's washes it all out. And he's like, all right, David, let's get your haircut. And David Beckham just continues lying there. And he's like, David? He checks his pulse and David Beckham's dead. And he's like, oh my God, what happened? And so he sees the headphones and he's like, oh, that's weird. And he listens to the headphones and they're just going, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in. With the joke being that David Beckham's so stupid that he needs to be reminded to breathe. I don't know. I haven't thought about that in the longest time, and it feels harsh because David Beckham just seems like quite a nice dude. He'd also been diagnosed with an enlarged heart, though as far as I can tell, this was just based on various symptoms he had like fatigue and shortness of breath, not from any sort of visual confirmation that his heart was actually big. Either way, his doctor advised him to not spend so much time vigorously fucking on account of his heart. Advice that he was happy to ignore. I don't, no! Over the next week, Harding's condition appeared to be going up and down. There was some improvement, but then it became clear that his heart was the problem. There was even some pneumonia thrown in there for good measure. Charles prescribed things like caffeine, laxatives, and arsenic. Of course he did. Where's Dr. Joel? Which was commonly used as comic. At least I'd hope they'd be extremely watered down, being a homeopath and all. Despite Joel's protestations. Oh, yeah, the real doctor. But it seemed to be helping, and Harding's condition seemed to improve. On the afternoon of August the 2nd, a bedridden Harding appeared to have improved enough that he was allowed to sit up in bed. His wife, Florence, came in to read him an article from the Saturday Evening Post titled "A Calm Review of a Calm Man." The entire article was just praising Harding, something he seemed to quite enjoy. I mean, who doesn't? When you read something flattering about yourself, you're like, oh, no, thank you so much. Yeah, I am great, thank you. Yeah, I'm an excellent human being and extremely smart and handsome. As Florence read to him, Harding spoke his final words. That's good. Go on, read some more. He then convulsed a bit before immediately dropping dead. The cause of death was officially reported as being a stroke of cerebral apoplexy, what we'd now just call cerebral hemorrhaging, where your brain starts bleeding. It's now believed that Harding died of a heart attack, but the symptoms of cardiac arrest were poorly understood at the time, so it wasn't given a lot of serious consideration. Wait. People found it easier to diagnose brain bleeds rather than heart attacks? We can't be certain how he died, though, because for some reason Florence refused to allow an autopsy and demanded that he be embalmed immediately. That is fucking suspicious. People act weird when people have died, but that is really odd, Florence. You murderer! At the time of his presidency, Harding had been extremely well liked, not just in the United States, but around the world. However, following his death, an endless stream of scandals began to be uncovered. Wait, didn't we say how much he loved vigorously? Sometimes you gotta say please. Tenacious D, anybody? Just having blasts from my past today, apparently. David Beckham jokes, Tenacious D. Sometimes you gotta say please. First, there were all the extramarital affairs, at least one of which resulted in an illegitimate daughter. It was long speculated that he fathered an illegitimate child, but this was eventually confirmed in 2015. Oh my god, who cares? Through DNA testing. Much worse than moral shortcomings, however, was the amount of corruption that existed during his presidency. The homeopath Charles Sawyer wasn't the only wholly unqualified person that Harding had brought with him to Washington. He filled important positions with his friends, many of whom he'd met in Ohio while working as a state-level politician. A few of them worked out well, a few were stated as doing minimal damage, but a number of them were wildly corrupt. It's almost as if appointing your friends and large dollar campaign contributors to cabinet positions or as leaders of important government agencies is a terrible idea that severely damages the country. Who would have known? And it's great that we've completely gotten rid of that problem. The most corrupt of Harding's appointees became known as the Ohio Gang because of their connection to Ohio state politics. The years following Harding's death contained a deluge of scandals relating to his time as president, and his reputation was completely destroyed. But one of the most persistent stories from the time came from the 1930 book The Strange Death of President Harding, written by Gaston Means, a well-known bootlegger, conman, and member of the Harding administration. I'm like, wait, why are we paying attention to this guy's book? Oh, because he was in the administration! There were a lot of scandalous accusations in the book, many of which were known to be true, such as the Teapot Dome scandal. I've heard of that. But the story that really grabbed people's attention was the allegation that Harding had actually been poisoned by Florence with the aid of the quack doctor. The motivation for this murder was, of course, his incessant cheating on her. In terms of creating a conspiracy, Gaston really couldn't... Isn't that the dude from Beauty and the Beast? Gaston! Couldn't have done a better job. He picked a person who was in the years-long process of being publicly disgraced, including a bunch of real scandals in his book, and then made up a story that seemed totally plausible rather than being an outlandish lie. However, if you want to pull something like this off, remember to pay your ghostwriter. Oh, it's like that. Have you seen that movie War Dogs? Where it's like everything's going brilliantly, and then they forget to pay some dude that they owe like a tiny amount of money to in the grand scheme of things, and it all goes to because he's like, well, I'm going to tell on you then, because you didn't pay me, you dicks. Always pay your people. Gaston had been part of the Harding administration, so he knew a lot of dirt, and it made sense to market the book as being written by him. But the actual author was Mae Dixon Thacker, and she eventually came out to say that the story about Florence murdering her husband was a total and complete fabrication. While she claimed to be upset that Gaston had made her write down lies about the former president, her real complaint was that he was stiffing her on the royalty checks. Despite the fact that there is no evidence to support the conspiracy theory, and the fact that the book's writer explicitly said it was all a lie, this story has continued to persist for decades. It's almost 100 years later, and there are still tons of people who believe that Florence assassinated the president for cheating on her. And hey, if she was so innocent, then why wouldn't she let the doctors perform an autopsy? Oh, I thought that was part of the lie. Did that actually happen? Because that's still then mad suspicious, Florence. You murderer. FDR allowed Pearl Harbor to happen. Oh, this is close to my conspiracy theory about a war. All right, now we come to slightly more modern times, which means these are the theories you're more likely to have some experience with, and this particular conspiracy theory has been popular since the day it originally happened. If you're familiar with the name Thomas Dewey, which I imagine Simon is not, absolutely not, Kevster, it is likely only as the butt of a joke. A month before the 1948 presidential election, polls predicted that Dewey would win in a landslide so severe that the incumbent, Harry Truman, may as well drop out of the race. Wait. Truman? I know. Thomas Dewey? No idea who that is. The Chicago Daily Tribune was using a rather unique sort of printing press at the time, one that required them to go to print hours before other major newspapers. Not all of the states had finished counting ballots and projected a winner yet, so the Tribune just went with all the polling and the advice of their veteran Washington political analyst. The result was a gleeful Harry Truman celebrating his successful re-election by holding up a copy of the Tribune that ran the headline, "Dewey defeats Truman." Oh, I see. So they printed that and then he didn't win. So that's funny. I like that. That's what most people know him for. But 4 years earlier, in the lead up to the 1944 presidential election, Dewey had the power to single-handedly change the course and potential outcome of World War II. Okay, when war broke out across Europe, it was incredibly unpopular in the United States. I mean, I'm sure it was unpopular amongst all the people the Nazis were invading and committing war crimes against, but the idea of stepping in to help was really unpopular in America. A lot of people thought that entering World War I was a mistake, and about 80 to 90% of US citizens supported neutrality in the face of what was considered somebody else's problem. I mean, I get it. Glad America got involved because, yeah, but I get it. It's an ocean away. It's really far away. In 1940, FDR even won his unprecedented third term on the back of his promise that your boys are not going to be sent into any foreign wars. It's generally well accepted that FDR was being deceptive and manipulative to some degree, as he neglected to mention that if the US was attacked, that it would no longer be considered a foreign war, even if the fighting was taking place on another continent. Yeah, which makes sense. I mean, why? What the f***, Japan? You want America to come at you? And we all know what happened next. On December the 7th, 1941, a day that will live in infamy, the Japanese launched a surprise attack on the US naval fleet stationed at Pearl Harbor. This required an immediate response against Japan by the US military, and it provided a backdoor by which to enter the war at large, and right from the start, people were real suspicious of this. FDR had moved the entire Pacific Naval Fleet from California to Pearl Harbor before the attack, which many people felt was an invitation for the Japanese to launch a strike on that location. It was a juicy target, just begging to be bombed. Of course, the counter to this is that they believed the fleet stationed in Hawaii would be a deterrent, and that they severely underestimated Japan's capabilities, believing that an attack on the scale of what happened wouldn't have been possible. Not only did people think FDR was trying to invite the Japanese to attack, they thought he knew it was going to happen and allowed it to anyway. He understood how important it was to stop Nazi Germany, but to do so was going to require approval from the American people who were vehemently opposed to foreign wars. Ah, those were the good old days, back when the US government actually wanted public support rather than engaging in a bunch of foreign forever wars, regardless of how unpopular they were. Anyway, among the people who believed that FDR knew about and allowed the attack to happen was Thomas Dewey. Not only did he believe this theory, he thought he could prove it. In the lead-up to the 1944 election, Dewey prepared to give a speech blowing the lid off this entire conspiracy and revealing to the American people that FDR had lied to them so that he could draw the United States into a war. That's when the Men in Black came to visit him. Okay, fine, it was the Army Chief of Staff, George Marshall, but the meeting still had very much a Men in Black vibe to them. The US had been intercepting communications from the Japanese for years. In the week of November the 17th to the 25th alone, back in 1941, the Navy had intercepted 83 Japanese messages, and allegedly one of those messages from November the 25th made reference to the attack that would take place on Pearl Harbor just a couple of weeks later. Dewey felt the American people had the right to know, but Marshall and the military disagreed. As it turned out, even in 1944, the Japanese were still using the same encryption method for their messages that they had been in 1941, despite the fact that their ships kept getting mysteriously torpedoed by submarines whenever they were given specific instructions on where and when to go. Really, Japan? The Japanese had no idea the US had cracked their codes. Really? Just luck, is it? And if Marshall was going to let Dewey give that secret away on national radio. Yeah, I mean, fair play. Do I think people should be allowed to speak out on stuff like this? Yes. Do I think it should be tempered with national security? Obviously, yes. Is it more important that the American people learn about this later and that the Japanese don't know the codes were cracked? Yes, obviously. It's unclear exactly what was said or what threats may or may not have been made, but Dewey relented and did not tell the American people about all of the cracked Japanese communications, even though doing so would have probably guaranteed victory in the election. Well, good for you. What was his name? Dewey? Good for you. But the question remains, did FDR know about the attack beforehand, and did he want it to happen? Well, according to the conspiracy theory, the answer to both of these is yes, but the reality is less clear. Well, realistically, he did want something to happen because he really, really wanted to stop the fucking Nazis, but it's unclear whether or not he let Americans die to achieve those goals. From what I can tell, it's agreed upon that FDR knew the Japanese planned to launch an attack on either December the 6th or 7th, but it said that he didn't know where. Allegedly, they believed that the attack was going to be on either the British or French fleets, not Pearl Harbor. There's also the reasonable points that if the goal was just to rile American support for the war, you probably don't park the entire Pacific Fleet in Hawaii, let the Japanese blow up a destroyer and a few planes to minimize casualties, financial losses, and losses of military equipment, and hope that it still has the desired result on public opinion. On the other hand, I can also see a very minor attack being something that the American people might demand to be handled diplomatically rather than through full-on involvement in another world war. It's hard to say. A lot of information and memos have come out over the past few decades regarding the Pearl Harbor attack, but there hasn't been a smoking gun. There's a lot of information to suggest that FDR knew about the planned attack on Pearl Harbor and let it happen, but there's also plausible explanations for everything as well. Honestly, I kind of regret including this theory in the episode instead of pitching it as its own, because there's way more to this theory than somebody said something insane and people inexplicably believed it, but since I can't definitively prove or disprove either side of this one, at least not without doing a much deeper dive into the topic. Wow, if you really did prove or disprove it, that would be a major, historical note, no? I'll have to leave it up to you whether or not FDR allowed Pearl Harbor to happen. So, if I may, I'll share my opinion. I don't think so. For the simple fact that this was a really long time ago, it would have definitely involved a lot of people. Someone would have spoken out at some point once there was no real risk to them. And they'd be able to prove it somehow. It's just been too long. Like, the bigger a conspiracy and the longer time has passed, the less likely it is to be a conspiracy unless it's been proven. At some point, there's a deathbed revelation. At some point, somebody's like, I can't take it anymore. I'm telling everyone. That said, I'm sorry for exposing you to so much history and learning. Let me make it simple by switching gears and bringing up something insane that everybody said and people inexplicably believed. Eisenhower signed a treaty with extraterrestrials. Wouldn't be an episode of Decoding the Unknown if we didn't slip aliens in here, is it? Would it? Dwight D. Eisenhower was president of the US from 1953 to 1961, but on the evening of February the 20th, 1954, the Associated Press put out a bulletin that Eisenhower had died of a heart attack. 2 minutes later, they put out a news bulletin saying, whoopsie, just kidding. However, the events of that evening have been the topic of speculation and debate for decades. Alright, at the time, Eisenhower was on vacation in Palm Springs playing golf. Even though this was supposed to be a vacation, the president still had a very full schedule. There were a number of public appearances, and even had to take part in some actual work meetings. Among the planned appearances was a dinner scheduled for the evening in question, but Ike never showed up. He had seemingly vanished and didn't reappear until the following morning. Well, obviously, he was on an alien spaceship. This led to a lot of theories and speculation, among them that he'd traveled to Edwards Air Force Base for a secret meeting he had telepathically arranged with extraterrestrials. Note that the theory is that the aliens were able to communicate telepathically, not that Ike had magic powers. This is just so silly. Anyway, according to the theory, Ike met with a group of aliens known as Nordics, because they were 6 to 7 feet tall with blue eyes, long blonde hair, and sleek Nordic features. Ah, yes, 6 to 7 feet tall, just like all the Nordics. The purpose of the meeting was to arrange a treaty between the United States and the aliens. The Nordics were going to provide advanced scientific and spiritual knowledge. How exciting. And all they wanted in return was for the United States to stop nuclear testing and disarm their nuclear weapons. Sounds like a win all round then, doesn't it? What do they get from it? Why the aliens were only meeting with the US instead of also engaging with the Russians and other nuclear powers of the world, that's unclear. I mean, it's unclear in terms of this theory making any sort of logical sense. Obviously, the answer is because the theory was created by Americans and we're all self-centered narcissists who forget that other countries exist. Or matter. Regardless, Ike decided that engaging in the Cold War was far more important than being gifted a bunch of cool future tech from an obviously superior alien race, so they parted ways. He's like, yeah, thanks. But no thanks. We're going to continue making our bombs. However, the two more meetings between Ike and the aliens that took place at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico, just 120 miles away from Roswell, because of course. And because these meetings were taking place near Roswell, this time Ike was obviously meeting with the Greys rather than the Nordics. Oh my god, guys, the fiction is just... stop. Conspiracy theorists totally gloss over this point, but I think it's worth addressing. Not only was there an alleged cover-up of meetings between a US president and extraterrestrial diplomats, but there were two entirely different species of aliens. It's one thing to suggest that aliens have made contact with humans, but suggesting that a multitude of alien species have all come to Earth seems like a bigger deal than who they happen to visit. If Earth was playing host to a variety of different types of aliens, this feels like the sort of thing that would be difficult to cover up. It does, doesn't it? Or maybe not. Because both of the species were only interested in talking to the US president, not to any other world leaders or scientists or anything, or maybe they did want to speak to scientists as well, because there was an alleged organization called the Majestic 12, containing 12 elite scientists and military leaders. I feel like we've made a video about that before, who were allegedly involved in investigations of alien spacecraft and who may have been privy to this meeting. But regardless of how US-centric this entire conspiracy was, it was alleged that Ike and the Greys struck a deal. They also wanted us to stop building nuclear weapons, but that was off the table. Instead, the agreed-upon treaty was that the Greys wouldn't interfere with business on Earth, and we wouldn't interfere with them. Yes, I'm sure they were extremely concerned about that. They flew across the galaxy to us, and they're like, you don't fuck up our home planet, we won't fuck up yours. And we're like, yeah, we definitely won't do that. Otherwise, we would. If you did, we would definitely do that to yours. That's definitely something we can do. That's capable. We're capable of that. We can do that. The Greys were also allowed to abduct humans for experimentation and anal probing, so long as the president received a list of everybody abducted and all the test subjects were returned home safely. I don't think humanity got anything in exchange for this part, but maybe we were given some scientific knowledge or something. Maybe some scientific knowledge they discovered up someone's bottom. I don't think the conspiracy theorists were overly concerned with whether or not the alleged contract had consideration for both sides, just that it provided proof that alien abductions were taking place. So, what was the administration's official explanation for Ike's Palm Beach disappearance? After all, that was what started this entire conspiracy. Well, according to the official statement, Ike chipped a crown while eating some fried chicken and had to make an emergency dentist appointment that evening to get it repaired. Oh, that's ridiculous. He was obviously meeting with the aliens. Seems like a simple and mundane enough explanation, and one that's pretty believable. Ike had gotten a crown put in a couple of years earlier, and it broke and needed to be repaired just a few months later. And just 5 months after Ike's golfing vacation, the crown broke again and was finally replaced with one that didn't suck so much. So again, the excuse for his disappearance makes perfect sense. The only problem was that for decades, there was absolutely no record of this happening. The Eisenhower Library has tons of notes about this vacation, including every person that Ike even tangentially came into contact with. But there are no records of any late-night dentist visits. Similarly, the office of the dentist Ike allegedly saw had no records of treating the president, which seems like the sort of thing you'd probably make a note of. Look, even if this didn't happen and he didn't go to the dentist, then he obviously had some sort of secret meeting. And it just wasn't with aliens. Why would you jump to aliens? There's nothing to support this. Admittedly, I don't believe the dentist's office was looked into until years later, at which point the records may have already been destroyed. You're only legally required to keep records for so many years, and since everything was paper back then instead of digital, it made sense to discard things as soon as possible to free up space. Personally, I'd have kept the proof that I'd done work for a sitting president, but these sort of administrative matters were probably handled by a board secretary rather than the dentist himself. Yeah, if I was the dentist, I'd be like, cool, can we have a picture? I'd hang that on my wall, and then I wouldn't keep, the piece of paper that says he came in. I'll just throw it away after, I don't know, however many years. The lack of documentation about this visit allowed this theory to run wild for decades, though files released from the Surgeon General's office in 1991 did contain dental records pertaining to Ike's crown repairs back in February 1954. Not that evidence corroborating the official version of events did anything to stem the proliferation of this conspiracy. No, because once it's got started, it just keeps on going, doesn't it? JFK was killed attempting to reveal extraterrestrials. The JFK assassination has been the subject of countless conspiracies over the years. In fact, I wrote an entire episode on this channel about the assassination that you should definitely check out, as there definitely seems to have been something suspicious going on. Yeah, I think the JFK one, I'm like, I don't know what it was, but there's something weird about that. Unfortunately, but not surprisingly, there wasn't anything new or interesting involved. That's not to say that Lee Harvey Oswald was some sort of patsy, as there's a lot of strong evidence that he shot Kennedy, but that doesn't mean he was the only person who did so. Regardless, interest in the Kennedy assassination has increased in recent months with the release of tens of thousands of pages of documents earlier this year. Unfortunately, but not surprisingly, there wasn't anything new or interesting in those documents. It was just the same documents that had been released under Biden and Trump years ago, except this time they didn't redact the names and social security numbers of CIA operatives, some of whom were still alive and actively working for the organization. That's probably fine, though. Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. It's not like they're spies or... Oh, wait. No, they are spies. Oh. But while there wasn't a smoking gun released, because such a document would have been destroyed decades ago, assuming it had ever existed in the first place, I do still have a newer theory related to the Kennedy assassination that I didn't cover in the previous episode. This theory was presented in the 2010 book A Celebration of Freedom, JFK and the New Frontier, by author Dr. William Lester, PhD. PhD in homeopathy, Doc. No, he's like a real academic. I apologize, I don't know why I said that. It's just because the guy earlier, he upset me with his homeopathy. Don't let the PhD in history from the University of Oxford confuse you, though. Okay, impressive, well done. Assuming his listed credentials are real. William went on to found the Institute of Metaphysics, a religious, non-secular, non-academic institute that offered unaccredited PhDs in things like cryptozoology, ufology, paranormal science, and demonology. What's the point of an unaccredited PhD? I feel like that's just... It's not a PhD then, is it? So even if his educational background is genuine and not fabricated, dude is still a crackpot. Oh yes. But it takes a crackpot to come up with a crackpot theory, so at least we're in luck in that regard. According to William's book, JFK was murdered by the CIA because he wanted to share information about the existence of UFOs and extraterrestrials. No, he didn't. Stop it. His book highlighted a memo written from JFK to the director of the CIA in which the president was requesting that they share all information they had regarding UFOs with NASA. This was meant to turn into a collaborative effort with the USSR, with James Webb coordinating with the Soviets for joint space exploration. The memo was dated as having been written just 10 days before the assassination, with the implication being that the timing of this was causal rather than coincidental. Right from the start, the contents of the memo sound pretty weird. I don't know if you know this either, but Americans and Soviets were famously trying to outdo one another and see who could conquer space first by putting a man on the moon. Oh, whoa. Really? I'd never heard of that. That's cool. That's going to really get space exploration going far. It's going to end with someone walking on the moon, right? Competition's powerful. A sort of space race, if you will. That's an interesting way to put it. I've never heard it put that way before. But it is, I guess, like a race to space. There were collaborative efforts, but those didn't really start until the 1970s. The idea that Kennedy would have undermined the Apollo program's mission of American supremacy is confounding, to say the least. Still, the memo looked official enough to the untrained eye, plus it was published in a book written by a guy whose name started with Doctor and ended with PhD. This was all the proof that was needed for most people, and the story spread like wildfire. There were tons of news articles and YouTube videos from 2010 talking about the connection between JFK and aliens, citing the memo from William's book as proof. In fact, new media is still being published, acting as if this was a breaking revelation from the recent release of JFK files. Of course they were. Conspiracies sell. People love a good conspiracy theory. The only problem with that particular framing is that this memo doesn't actually appear anywhere in those files. In fact, it doesn't appear anywhere at all other than in William's book. Kennedy kept carbon copies of all his correspondence, more so than any other president before him, and all of that stuff is carefully catalogued and stored at the JFK library. Yet workers at the library have been unable to find a copy of this memo, nor was a copy of the memo in the government's official archives that were released to the public. It's almost as if William just made the entire thing up to sell his book. Not that I would ever accuse the good doctor of such a thing. No one's ever made stuff up in a book in order to sell it, right? That would be outrageous. That said, experts have noted that the memo looks off. There are issues with the formatting and the language, with it not sounding like it was written in Kennedy's voice. And what even was that voice anyway? I've lived in and around Boston for my entire life, and I've never heard anybody that talked like Kennedy unless they were doing a bit. I don't know where the hell the Kennedys got their accent from, but it wasn't Boston. At the very least, it wasn't the pleb parts of Boston, but maybe there was some secret high society version of the Boston accent that only the Kennedys and their wealthy friends could afford. Anyway, among all the issues with the memo, the most notable was the words "top secret," which were printed opposite the header of the memo in tiny text. Traditionally, classified documents are marked using a giant, impossible-to-miss stamp so that there is no confusion about the classification level of a memo so that it doesn't get handed to somebody who isn't supposed to see it. Yeah, there's all these different things like restricted, secret, top secret, or non-public or something like that. There's all sorts of different ratings for this. It's quite interesting. It's fascinating that this theory became so widespread based on its appearance in a single book by a guy who was selling cryptozoology doctorates. But I guess it does show that people are willing to believe what they want to believe. Indeed. Oh, that's the end of it. That's it. That's the end. Not of the episode, but of this entry. Obama was born in Kenya. There have been multiple conspiracies referred to as birther movements over the years. This all stems from the constitutional requirement that a president must be a natural-born US citizen. While these have largely been modern conspiracies, there are a few historical examples as well. Isn't this the reason why, fortunately, Elon Musk can never be president? Because he's not born in America. President Chester A. Arthur was born in the northernmost country of Vermont, so some people speculated that he had actually been born in Canada and was America's first Canadian president. Oh, careful. Another conspiracy theory surrounding Warren Harding was that his great-grandmother was black. That wouldn't have been disqualifying on a constitutional basis, but much of the public felt that someone who was an eighth black was unfit to serve as president. The past, everybody. Always remember, it was the worst. Those conspiracies were much smaller in scope, though, with the one about Arthur largely not surfacing until after his time as president. But in the 2000s, we saw a number of questions raised about whether or not presidential candidates qualified as natural-born citizens. Ironically, the first two modern birther movements, both happening in the presidential election of 2008, though one was surrounding Barack Obama, which was much more famous. Obama's opponent, John McCain, had been born in the Panama Canal zone because his father was in the Navy. This was less of a conspiracy, since we know that statement about McCain to be fag, and it was more a matter of whether or not he counted as being a natural-born citizen. There was some debate about this among legal scholars, but ultimately the Senate passed a bipartisan ruling confirming that McCain was eligible. Things were not so easily resolved for Obama, though. Despite being born firmly on American soil in Hawaii, there were still two different claims surrounding his status as a natural-born citizen. Wait, what if you're an American, you got two American parents, and you're born like when they're on holiday? Like they're just on holiday in, I don't know, Spain or whatever, and then you're born. Does that mean you can't be president? That's super weird. There were two different claims surrounding his status as a natural-born citizen. One was that he was actually born in Kenya rather than Hawaii, and the other was that he'd given up his American citizenship and become a citizen of Indonesia when he was a child. These claims weren't entirely baseless either. I mean, they were completely wrong, but at least there was a basis for the claims. A few years after Obama was born, his parents divorced and his mother married a man from Indonesia. The family moved to Indonesia, where Obama attended school, and there was one school document where he was incorrectly listed as being an Indonesian citizen. This was a simple clerical error that would have been meaningless for anybody else, but because Obama was running for president, it was used to claim that he had given up his American citizenship to become an Indonesian citizen. I feel like that is something that is very easily provable by just someone going and having a look at the database and being like, no, he didn't. Boom. Done. Easy. Moving on. For anyone curious, though, if that story was true, then Obama would indeed have lost his status as a natural-born citizen from a constitutional standpoint, as he would have had to become a naturalized citizen again once he returned to the States. As a side note, the whole natural-born citizen thing is a dumb and arbitrary rule, especially considering all the founding fathers were natural-born citizens of the British Empire and not the United States. Yeah, it's so weird that if you're just born in America, or the opposite could be true. If a husband and wife are on holiday in America, and then the wife gives birth, apparently that kid can just be like, yeah, you could be an American. You get a passport. Which is bizarre. Regardless, the Indonesian conspiracy was definitely the minority opinion. The majority of birthers believed that Obama was born in Kenya rather than Hawaii because, well, I mean, look at him. Oh, God. The origin of this conspiracy actually has more to it than that, but that was definitely the argument put forth by most proponents of this conspiracy. That said, the origin is actually a bit more interesting, if not completely confusing. A lot of people don't know this, but Obama wrote a memoir back in the 90s called Dreams from My Father. I'm not sure if Kevin's being sarcastic, but I'm pretty sure that's a very famous book. It came out about the time he was getting involved in Illinois politics, so presumably the goal of the book was to get Obama's name out there. Theoretically, it'd be to let people know about him as a person and a candidate, but this is America. Nobody gives a shit about any of that, they just care about name recognition. Anyway, Obama had used a literary agent to help get his book published, a company called Acton and Dystal. The agency produced a promotional booklet in 1991 for Obama, and in it, they said that he was, quote, born in Kenya and raised in Indonesia and Hawaii. Not only did the physical booklets exist, but the description remained on their website until 2007. Where did this information come from? Did you just Google this and it just, pulled up someone else's bio with the same name? The weird part about this is that the booklet's editor appears to have just pulled this entirely out of her ass. That, or she only skimmed through Obama's memoir to get the gist of it and remember the details wrong. He had visited Kenya for the first time in the 1980s during his 20s and discussed the trip in the memoir. But at no point did the book or anything provided to the agency suggest that Obama had been born there. Even weirder, though, is that members of the birther movement didn't point to this alleged evidence of his Kenyan birth. In fact, the existence of this erroneous booklet wasn't even widely known about until 2012, long after Obama had won his first election. While the booklet likely provided the origin for the claim, being that Obama was specifically born in Kenya, the people who wanted to believe this didn't need any proof. His skin was proof enough. Oh God, here we go. And I may have ranted about this before, but this was honestly an insane theory. Before he could become the Democratic Party nominee for president, Obama had to get through Hillary Clinton first. This wasn't a particularly difficult task, since it's not like Hillary was remotely popular, but she was still a Clinton. If there were any constitutional basis by which Obama could have been disqualified from running, don't you think the Clintons would have been able to dig that up during the primaries before he became the nominee? Oh yeah, Clintons are powerful. But no. Instead, it fell on Donald Trump to promote the birther conspiracy, with Trump going on live TV every chance he possibly could to demand the release of Obama's birth certificate. And then, once the document was released, Trump demanded the release of a more different version of the birth certificate. I think the behavior might have been that Trump derangement syndrome that people are always talking about. Despite the clerical error in Indonesia, and the whatever the fuck happens with that literary agency, there is no evidence that Obama was born in Kenya. He has a Hawaiian birth certificate, with multiple newspapers in Hawaii publishing birth announcements for him, announcements which included his parents' home address. That may seem weird, but this was standard operating procedure for the Hawaii Department of Health at the time, and publishing someone's address wasn't seen as creepy or intrusive back then because we were all listed in the phone book anyway. Yeah, this is it. There used to be a book with everyone's phone number in it. Now I guard my phone number like a gemstone. On the bright side, the public feud between Obama and an old man yelling at clouds did result in another conspiracy, one involving the death of Osama bin Laden. According to the theory, bin Laden was killed by US forces a full day before the announcement was made, but Obama chose to delay informing the American people about this victory so that his press conference would preempt the season premiere of The Celebrity Apprentice. I don't think there's anything to back up this theory other than the fact that Trump's show was indeed preempted because of Obama's press conference, but it's still a funny theory. Yeah, it's funny, but it's obviously not real. The Trump P tapes. Oh, I forgot about this. Thanks to the 24-hour news cycle and stories only having a shelf life of a few hours, thanks to the constant barrage of insanity the world's currently facing, the release of the Steele dossier feels like it happened about 50 years ago, but the report was released just 10 days before Trump's first inauguration back in 2017. Which, it feels like a long-ass time ago. It was 8 years ago. The Steele dossier was compiled by Christopher Steele, a former intelligence officer for MI6 who specialized in Russian affairs and co-founded the private sector intelligence group Orbis Business Intelligence. Orbis was contracted by a company with ties to Hillary Clinton's campaign to compile information about Trump and his alleged links to Russia. Yeah, that's the Clinton MO. There you go. News of the dossier broke on January the 10th, 2017, and later that day, BuzzFeed published a leaked 35-page draft of the report without Steele's permission. The unfinished report contained a lot of claims, much of which pointed to heavy collusion between Trump and Russia, as well as alleged evidence that Trump had been heavily compromised by Putin. That said, none of this was definitive evidence of anything. Steele had compiled a bunch of unverified and potentially unverifiable memos, and he stated that everything included was raw intelligence, not established facts, but a starting point for further investigation. That's probably why the report was unfinished and why he was so upset that BuzzFeed published it in the first place, at least in the form that they did. Yeah, how did BuzzFeed get their hands on this? That's crazy. This should be very carefully guarded. Someone at your company needs to get fired. Still, there's a lot of interesting facts in there going all the way back to 2011, long before Trump was a candidate for president. But the piece of information that garnered the most attention, on account of it being the most salacious, was the allegations of the Trump P-tapes. Based on the previous conspiracy, I think it's safe to assume that Trump hated Obama. He was pushing the birth conspiracy in a manner befitting a cartoon supervillain, and there really isn't any possible explanation for that other than personal hatred or overt racism. Well, wait, there is a really good explanation for that. He really wanted to be president. And he didn't want Clinton to be president. And Obama supported Clinton. No? So in 2013, when Trump took a trip to Moscow, it was allegedly time for him to act out some sort of bizarre revenge fantasy. Okay. According to information in the Steele dossier, which is again unverified and possibly unverifiable, Trump stayed at the Ritz-Carlton and booked the presidential suite. He didn't actually stay in the presidential suite, he had a different room for himself, but he wanted to book the suite because Obama had slept in the bed in that room. Okay. He then allegedly... Why wouldn't you sleep in the presidential suite if you booked it? He then allegedly hired a gaggle of sex workers to piss all over the bed while he watched to show his disdain for Obama. Come to think of it, I don't have any idea what the collective noun for sex workers is. It's probably not a gaggle, though, at least not if they're any good at their jobs. Maybe a gaggle of sex workers. Anyway, if these alleged events did take place, then they were also allegedly filmed in secret by the Federal Security Services of the Russian Federation, the spiritual successor to the KGB. If you're wondering about the logistics of that and how it could happen without Trump noticing, hidden cameras are a thing, my dude. Wait. Well, obviously, they're spies. That's what they do. It was 2013. It's not like this theory required a bunch of cameramen and some dude carrying a boom mic to be filming it. This was one of many alleged pieces of blackmail that the Steele dossier claimed Russia had on Trump. There was a bunch more stuff involving sex workers and a lot of bribes and corrupt business deals as well. The report also stated that the Kremlin had promised not to use all of the incriminating stuff that they had on him as blackmail, thanks to the high levels of voluntary cooperation forthcoming from his team. I'd say we'll never know whether or not this conspiracy is true, but if it's true, then we will definitely find out. I have no idea when it will happen, but if those tapes exist, then they are 100% going to be leaked at some point within our lifetimes. This is the thing. The longer it gets away from a conspiracy and the more people that are involved, the more likely it's not to be true unless it's already been proven true. That feels like word salad, but I hope you get my meaning. And for that reason, I'm genuinely hoping that this conspiracy theory isn't true because nobody needs to see that shit, or rather that piss. Joe Biden was executed in 2020. Okay. We'll end today with a theory that, while having existed for over 4 years, recently came to prominence just a few weeks ago at the time of writing, thanks to a social media post by President Trump. Trump has a long history of posting and retweeting various conspiracy theories online, and before anyone tries to make the claim that retweets do not equal endorsements, which certainly can be true, Trump takes these conspiracy theories offline as well. He has repeated a ton of these conspiracies in interviews, press conferences, and during the presidential debate last year. But the latest theory Trump has endorsed is perhaps the most outlandish one yet. He reposted the comment, "There is no Joe Biden, executed in 2020. Biden clones, doubles, and robotic engineered soulless, mindless entities are what you see. Democrats don't know the difference." Bruh, if this was the case, they would have got a better robot. Like Biden would have got more competent rather than less competent. Those certainly are words that you are legally allowed to say and endorse, but why would you want to? This theory also raises a few questions. Most importantly, who executed Biden and why? And according to believers of QAnon, where this theory originated, of course it did, the answer to that is Donald Trump. Why he would tweet about his own secret execution of a president-elect is anybody's guess, but none of this is supposed to make sense. According to the theory, Trump worked with secret forces within the military to hold a military tribunal and execute Biden for treason. This is so crazy. Or corruption, or child trafficking, because why not? It isn't really clear which. We'll ignore the rather glaring and concerning fact that this theory claims Trump secretly executed a political opponent while in office, because that's not what this theory is about. The theory is that Biden was corrupt and senile and had to be taken out, and then had to be replaced with clones and robots, because reasons. So insane. There's plenty of alleged evidence of this conspiracy, though, most notably how different Biden looks in a number of different pictures. In some pictures, Biden appears to tower over his wife Jill, while in others, she looks only like an inch or two shorter than him, almost as if sometimes she wears high heels and sometimes she doesn't. But that wouldn't be possible. Perhaps more notable and more convincing is how different Biden's face looked in a variety of different settings. Someone might argue that everybody looks different in different settings, or that sometimes Biden was wearing makeup for the cameras and sometimes he was just going about his day. But those people are just sheep who refuse to unquestioningly accept statements made by an anonymous internet poster. Yes, because you're not the sheep by following this random internet poster. Also, if Biden was dead, why not just let him be dead and have Kamala be the president? Why create robots so advanced that they could learn all of Biden's quirks and mannerisms, but not so advanced they could string 2 fucking sentences together in a debate? And also, clones? This is such a personal pet peeve of mine, but people clearly need to be better educated on how cloning works, even if human cloning is illegal and unethical. Ignoring that, though, in order to have an 80-year-old clone of Biden, you would need to have cloned him 80 years ago. Clones don't just pop out of some magic tube in a lab as fully grown adults. They have to be grown as embryos inside a living host, ideally of the same species, and then they age at the normal rate. Yeah, it's just like an identical twin. The amount of foresight it would have taken to clone Biden 80 years ago and to keep the miraculous technological advancements secret from the entire world just on the off chance he became president and was executed by a political rival who wanted to keep that execution a secret. It's so ridiculous. It's phenomenal. That is godlike levels of premonition and intelligence, and if anybody was capable of planning that, then they should have been declared supreme emperor of Earth instead of working on stuff like this in the shadows. But even though this theory is beyond insane, even at just a cursory glance, there are people who believe this. There are people who believed for the entirety of Biden's presidency that he'd been executed and that the person we saw was an imposter. I'm not sure what's scarier, that a meaningful amount of the voting population was capable of believing such a stupid conspiracy theory, or that one of those people is currently the president. That's the end of the episode today. Thanks for being here. So daft.